Your trust fund doesn't exist anymore, my father announced coldly across his mahogany desk, not even looking up from his financial reports. We've been using it to support Olivia's career for years. It's all gone. The calm in my voice surprised. Even me, as I replied, "That's interesting, because I just had a very different conversation with the bank's forensic investigation team this morning." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The statement from Somerset Trust arrived on a Tuesday, buried among credit card offers and utility bills in my mail. I almost missed it, would have missed it, if not for the bold, red, urgent account notification stamped across the envelope. It was the first statement I'd received in nearly 5 years, ever since my parents had convinced me to let them manage the paperwork for the trust my grandparents had established for me. My name is Eliza Morgan, and at 28, I never expected to discover that my own family had been systematically draining the inheritance that was supposed to secure my future. I stood in my modest apartment kitchen, sunlight streaming through, windows that needed washing, as I stared at numbers that didn't make sense. According to the statement, my trust fund, which should have contained nearly $1, $2 million by now, had dwindled to just under $40,000. A note from the bank explained that they were conducting a security review of all accounts following a personnel change and requested that I verify recent transactions. Recent transactions. I flipped to the second page and felt my stomach drop. Regular withdrawals, sometimes twice monthly, ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. All authorized with proper signatures, all perfectly legal on paper. All completely unknown to me. My phone rang, displaying my mother's carefully curated profile picture. Perfect. Hair, perfect smile, perfect illusion of maternal warmth. "Darling, are you coming to brunch on Sunday? Your sister has such exciting news about her gallery opening in Paris. The connections your father helped her make at that charity gala last month really paid off." My sister Olivia, 3 years. Younger but light years ahead in my parents' estimation. The family's true artistic talent, the one worth investing in. "I got an interesting piece of mail today," I said instead of answering her question. The momentary silence on the other end told me everything. "Oh?" My mother's voice took on the slightly higher pitch it always did when she was caught off guard. "One of those ridiculous credit card offers? You really should go paperless, Eliza. So much more environmentally conscious." "It's from Somerset Trust, about my account." Another pause, longer this time. "Those statements were supposed to come to the house. Your father handles all that." Of course he did. My father, Richard Morgan, financial advisor to the elite, managing director of his own investment firm, community philanthropist, and, apparently, thief. "I'd like to discuss it with him. Is he home?" "He's very busy preparing for the Richards portfolio review, but I suppose he could spare a few minutes. Can it wait until Sunday?" "No," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "It can't." My parents' home stood as it always had, an imposing colonial on 2 manicured acres in Westfield Heights, the kind of house that featured regularly in architectural magazines and charity home tours. I had grown up in its perfectly appointed rooms, learning early that appearances mattered above all else in the Morgan family. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed Olivia's new Mercedes parked near the entrance. Sleek, white, undoubtedly expensive. My sister was here. Of course she was. My father's study door was closed when I arrived, my mother hovering anxiously in the hallway. "He's on a call, but he'll be finished soon. Can I get you some tea?" "I just bought that lavender blend you liked from the farmer's market." "I prefer to wait," I said, positioning myself directly across from his door. My mother's discomfort was palpable as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her silk blouse. When the door finally opened, my father emerged looking precisely as he always did. Tailored shirt with French cuffs, perfectly knotted tie, the confident posture of a man accustomed to respect. Behind him, to my surprise, sat Olivia, her expression a mixture of defiance and something that might have been guilt. "Eliza, your mother mentioned you received some correspondence from Somerset. No greeting, no warmth, straight to damage control. Let's discuss this in my office." I followed him in, noticing how Olivia seemed to shrink into the leather chair as I passed. My mother attempted to follow, but my father shook his head slightly. "Patricia, why don't you check on that lunch order? Olivia and I will sort this out with Eliza." The door closed, and I found myself seated across from my father's imposing desk, the same position I'd occupied countless times growing up. Report cards, college applications, career discussions, always being measured, usually found wanting. "Your trust fund doesn't exist anymore," my father announced coldly, not even looking up from his financial reports. "We've been using it to support Olivia's career for years. It's all gone." The calm in my voice surprised even me as I replied, "That's interesting, because I just had a very different conversation with the bank's forensic investigation team this morning." His head snapped up, the careful mask slipping for just a moment. I had never seen my father rattled before. It was momentarily satisfying before the full weight of the situation settled back on my shoulders. "What exactly do you mean by that?" His voice was steady, but his hand moved almost imperceptibly to close the folder in front of him. "I mean that after I received the statement, I didn't call you first. I called the bank, and they were very interested to learn that I hadn't authorized any of those withdrawals. They were particularly interested in how the signatures on the withdrawal forms didn't quite match the signature they had on file for me." Olivia made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. My father's expression didn't change, but his complexion had developed an ashen quality. "You've misunderstood the situation entirely," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he typically reserved for difficult clients. "Your grandfather's trust was always intended to benefit both you and your sister. The distributions were entirely appropriate." I removed a document from my bag and placed it on his desk. "That's not what the trust document says. Somerset provided me with a copy this morning. It specifically states that the funds were for my education and entrepreneurial endeavors, with remaining funds to be released to me in full on my 30th birthday. There's no mention of Olivia anywhere." "Dad?" Olivia's voice was barely audible. "You said it was a family trust. You said Eliza knew." I turned to my sister, seeing her, really seeing her for the first time in years. Designer clothes, carefully highlighted hair, the thin gold bangle from that boutique in Milan she'd mentioned at Christmas. All purchased with money that was never hers to spend. "How much did they take for you, Olivia? The gallery in New York? The apartment in London? The artist residency in Tokyo that was mysteriously arranged despite your portfolio being rejected? Twice before?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know it was just yours. They always said it was family money, that you were pursuing your own path and didn't need it." My own path had been a modest position at a publishing house, living in a one-bedroom apartment, carefully saving for a down payment that never seemed to grow large enough. All while believing my trust fund was safely invested, untouchable, until my 30th birthday when I planned to start my own literary agency. "Regardless of what Olivia understood," my father interjected, regaining his composure, "these were decisions made for the overall benefit of this family. Your sister has real talent. Her success reflects well on all of us. While my failure to become exceptional justified theft, the bitterness I'd suppressed for years seeped into my voice." "Not theft," he corrected sharply. "Reallocation of family resources to their most advantageous use. If you'd shown any particular promise in your endeavors, we would have supported you similarly." The casual cruelty of this statement hung in the air between us. Years of subtle comparisons, of measured praise for Olivia's achievements alongside gentle disappointment in my more modest pursuits, crystallized in that moment into something undeniable. I had never been the daughter they wanted, so they had taken what was rightfully mine and given it to the daughter who was. The bank doesn't see it as reallocation, I said quietly. Neither does the law. My father's expression hardened. You wouldn't dare pursue this officially. The scandal would destroy this family's reputation. Your sister's career would never recover. Maybe it shouldn't, I replied, standing up. Maybe a career built on stolen money doesn't deserve to continue. Eliza, please. Olivia stood too, reaching for my arm. I'll pay you back. I'm getting commissions now, real ones. My work is selling. I looked at my sister's perfectly manicured hand on my sleeve, remembering how we used to build blanket forts together as children, how she would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. When had we become these strangers, one designated for success at the other's expense? This isn't just about money, I said, gently removing her hand. This is about trust, about family, about years of lies. My father stood now too, his imposing height no longer intimidating as it once had been. What exactly do you want, Eliza? To punish us? To ruin your sister? Think carefully about your next steps. I met his gaze directly, something I rarely did throughout my childhood. I want what's rightfully mine. I want the truth acknowledged. And I want you both to understand exactly what you've done. As I turned to leave, my mother appeared at the doorway, her face pale with worry. What's happening? Richard, what have you done? Ask your husband where my trust fund went, I said as I passed her. Ask him why he forged my signature for 5 years. Ask him why he thought one daughter deserved everything, while the other deserved nothing. Outside, the perfectly manicured lawn stretched before me, the spring flowers arranged in meticulous patterns just beginning to bloom, everything in its proper place, everything maintained for appearance's sake. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into this carefully constructed image of family perfection, never quite measuring up. As I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Olivia, her mascara smudged from crying, her perfect composure shattered. I didn't know, she repeated. I swear I didn't know it was your money. Would it have mattered if you did? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. She hesitated just long enough for me to understand. That's what I thought. What happens now? She asked, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm spring air. I looked back at the house that had never truly felt like home. Now, I let the bank complete their investigation, and I decide what kind of person I want to be in the aftermath. As I drove away, I felt something unexpected beneath the anger and betrayal, a strange sense of liberation. For years, I had believed that my modest achievements were the result of my own limitations. Now I understood that the playing field had never been level, that the support lavished on my sister had been systematically denied to me. Yet I had built a life anyway. I had found work I enjoyed, created relationships based on genuine connection, rather than social advantage, developed resilience without the safety net I thought was waiting. Perhaps I was stronger than anyone in my family, myself included, had ever realized. The bank's investigation was just beginning, but something told me my own investigation, into who I really was beyond my family's distorted mirror, might prove even more valuable in the end. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The statement from Somerset Trust arrived on a Tuesday, buried among credit card offers and utility bills in my mail. I almost missed it, would have missed it, if not for the bold red urgent account notification stamped across the envelope. It was the first statement I'd received in nearly 5 years, ever since my parents had convinced me to let them manage the paperwork for the trust my grandparents had established for me. My name is Eliza Morgan, and at 28, I never expected to discover that my own family had been systematically draining the inheritance that was supposed to secure my future. I stood in my modest apartment kitchen, sunlight streaming through, windows that needed washing, as I stared at numbers that didn't make sense. According to the statement, my trust fund, which should have contained nearly $2 million by now, had dwindled to just under $40,000. A note from the bank explained that they were conducting a security review of all accounts following a personnel change and requested that I verify recent transactions. Recent transactions. I flipped to the second page and felt my stomach drop. Regular withdrawals, sometimes twice monthly, ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. All authorized with proper signatures, all perfectly legal on paper. All completely unknown to me. My phone rang, displaying my mother's carefully curated profile picture. Perfect. Hair, perfect smile, perfect illusion of maternal warmth. "Darling, are you coming to brunch on Sunday? Your sister has such exciting news about her gallery opening in Paris. The connections your father helped her make at that charity gala last month really paid off. My sister Olivia, 3 years. Younger but light years ahead in my parents' estimation. The family's true artistic talent. The one worth investing in." "I got an interesting piece of mail today," I said, instead of answering her question. The momentary silence on the other end told me everything. "Oh?" My mother's voice took on the slightly higher pitch it always did when she was caught off guard. "One of those ridiculous credit card offers? You really should go paperless, Eliza. So much more environmentally conscious. It's from Somerset. Trust. About my account." Another pause, longer this time. "Those statements were supposed to come to the house. Your father handles all that." Of course he did. My father, Richard Morgan, financial advisor to the elite, managing director of his own investment firm, community philanthropist, and, apparently, thief. "I'd like to discuss it with him. Is he home?" "He's very busy preparing for the Richards portfolio review, but I suppose he could spare a few minutes. Can it wait until Sunday?" "No," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "It can't." My parents' home stood as it always had, an imposing colonial on 2 manicured acres in Westfield Heights, the kind of house that featured regularly in architectural magazines and charity home tours. I had grown up in its perfectly appointed rooms, learning early that appearances mattered above all else in the Morgan family. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I noticed Olivia's new Mercedes parked near the entrance. Sleek, white, undoubtedly, expensive. My sister was here. Of course she was. My father's study door was closed when I arrived, my mother hovering anxiously in the hallway. "He's on a call, but he'll be finished soon. Can I get you some tea? I just bought that lavender blend you liked from the farmer's market." "I prefer to wait," I said, positioning myself directly across from his door. My mother's discomfort was palpable as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her silk blouse. When the door finally opened, my father emerged looking precisely as he always did. Tailored shirt with French cuffs, perfectly knotted tie, the confident posture of a man accustomed to respect. Behind him, to my surprise, sat Olivia, her expression a mixture of defiance and something that might have been guilt. "Eliza, your mother mentioned you received some correspondence from Somerset. No greeting, no warmth, straight to damage control. Let's discuss this in my office." I followed him in, noticing how Olivia seemed to shrink into the leather chair as I passed. My mother attempted to follow, but my father shook his head slightly. "Patricia, why don't you check on that lunch order? Olivia and I will sort this out with Eliza." The door closed, and I found myself seated across from my father's imposing desk, the same position I'd occupied countless times growing up. Report cards, college applications, career discussions, always being measured, usually found wanting. "Your trust fund doesn't exist anymore," my father announced coldly, not even looking up from his financial reports. We've been using it to support Olivia's career for years. It's all gone. The calm in my voice surprised even me as I replied, "That's interesting, because I just had a very different conversation with the bank's forensic investigation team this morning." His head snapped up, the careful mask slipping for just a moment. I had never seen my father rattled before. It was momentarily satisfying before the full weight of the situation settled back on my shoulders. "What exactly do you mean by that?" His voice was steady, but his hand moved almost imperceptibly to close the folder in front of him. "I mean that after I received the statement, I didn't call you first. I called the bank, and they were very interested to learn that I hadn't authorized any of those withdrawals. They were particularly interested in how the signatures on the withdrawal forms didn't quite match the signature they had on file for me." Olivia made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. My father's expression didn't change, but his complexion had developed an ashen quality. "You've misunderstood the situation entirely," he said, his voice taking on the condescending tone he typically reserved for difficult clients. "Your grandfather's trust was always intended to benefit both you and your sister. The distributions were entirely appropriate." I removed a document from my bag and placed it on his desk. "That's not what the trust document says. Somerset provided me with a copy this morning. It specifically states that the funds were for my education and entrepreneurial endeavors, with remaining funds to be released to me in full on my 30th birthday. There's no mention of Olivia anywhere." "Dad," Olivia's voice was barely audible. "You said it was a family trust. You said Eliza knew." I turned to my sister, seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time in years. Designer clothes, carefully highlighted hair, the thin gold bangle from that boutique in Milan she'd mentioned at Christmas. All purchased with money that was never hers to spend. "How much did they take for you, Olivia? The gallery in New York? The apartment in London? The artist residency in Tokyo that was mysteriously arranged despite your portfolio being rejected? Twice before?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know it was just yours. They always said it was family money, that you were pursuing your own path and didn't need it." My own path had been a modest position at a publishing house, living in a one-bedroom apartment, carefully saving for a down payment that never seemed to grow large enough, all while believing my trust fund was safely invested, untouchable, until my 30th birthday when I planned to start my own literary agency. "Regardless of what Olivia understood," my father interjected, regaining his composure, "these were decisions made for the overall benefit of this family. Your sister has real talent. Her success reflects well on all of us. While my failure to become exceptional justified theft, the bitterness I'd suppressed for years seeped into my voice." "Not theft," he corrected sharply. "Reallocation of family resources to their most advantageous use. If you'd shown any particular promise in your endeavors, we would have supported you similarly." The casual cruelty of this statement hung in the air between us. Years of subtle comparisons, of measured praise for Olivia's achievements alongside gentle disappointment in my more modest pursuits, crystallized in that moment into something undeniable. I had never been the daughter they wanted, so they had taken what was rightfully mine and given it to the daughter who was. "The bank doesn't see it as reallocation," I said quietly. "Neither does the law." My father's expression hardened. "You wouldn't dare pursue this officially. The scandal would destroy this family's reputation. Your sister's career would never recover." "Maybe it shouldn't," I replied, standing up. "Maybe a career built on stolen money doesn't deserve to continue." "Eliza, please." Olivia stood too, reaching for my arm. "I'll pay you back. I'm getting commissions now, real ones. My work is selling." I looked at my sister's perfectly manicured hand on my sleeve, remembering how we used to build blanket forts together as children, how she would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. When had we become these strangers, one designated for success at the other's expense? "This isn't just about money," I said, gently removing her hand. "This is about trust, about family, about years of lies." My father stood now too, his imposing height no longer intimidating as it once had been. "What exactly do you want, Eliza? To punish us? To ruin your sister? Think carefully about your next steps." I met his gaze directly, something I rarely did throughout my childhood. "I want what's rightfully mine. I want the truth acknowledged, and I want you both to understand exactly what you've done." As I turned to leave, my mother appeared at the doorway, her face pale with worry. "What's happening?" "Richard, what have you done?" "Ask your husband where my trust fund went," I said as I passed her. "Ask him why he forged my signature for 5 years. Ask him why he thought one daughter deserved everything while the other deserved nothing." Outside, the perfectly manicured lawn stretched before me, the spring flowers arranged in meticulous patterns just beginning to bloom. Everything in its proper place, everything maintained for appearance's sake. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into this carefully constructed image of family perfection, never quite measuring up. As I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Olivia, her mascara smudged from crying, her perfect composure shattered. "I didn't know," she repeated. "I swear I didn't know it was your money." "Would it have mattered if you did?" I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. She hesitated just long enough for me to understand. That's what I thought. "What happens now?" she asked, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm spring air. I looked back at the house that had never truly felt like home. "Now, I let the bank complete their investigation, and I decide what kind of person I want to be in the aftermath." As I drove away, I felt something unexpected beneath the anger and betrayal, a strange sense of liberation. For years, I had believed that my modest achievements were the result of my own limitations. Now I understood that the playing field had never been level, that the support lavished on my sister had been systematically denied to me. Yet I had built a life anyway. I had found work I enjoyed, created relationships based on genuine connection rather than social advantage, developed resilience without the safety net I thought was waiting. Perhaps I was stronger than anyone in my family, myself included, had ever realized. The bank's investigation was just beginning, but something told me my own investigation into who I really was beyond my family's distorted mirror might prove even more valuable in the end. Monday morning arrived with unexpected clarity, as though the weekend's revelations had cleared a fog I hadn't even realized surrounded me. I called Victoria Winters at Somerset Trust and scheduled a meeting for that afternoon, then sent a brief email to my supervisor at the publishing house requesting a personal day. By noon, I had organized my documentation, the original bank statements, Olivia's financial records, and my own timeline of events, into a comprehensive file. As I entered Somerset Trust's imposing headquarters in the financial district, I felt none of the intimidation such places had previously inspired in me. The marble floors, mahogany paneling, and hushed atmosphere had always seemed designed to remind ordinary people like me of our insignificance in the world of wealth and power. Today, those symbols seemed hollow, mere theatrical backdrops for dramas that had little to do with actual value. Victoria Winters greeted me with professional courtesy, guiding me to a conference room where 2 other individuals waited: James Chen, Somerset's legal counsel, and Detective Eleanor Garcia from the Financial Crimes Division. "Ms. Morgan, thank you for coming in," Victoria said once introductions were complete. "Before we proceed, I want to confirm that you understand your options. You are under no obligation to pursue criminal charges. This meeting is exploratory, and you can halt the process at any stage." "I understand," I replied, opening my folder of documents. "But before I make any decisions, there's something I'd like to show you." I presented Olivia's records alongside the trust withdrawal documentation, explaining the connection between each missing amount and its corresponding investment in my sister's career. Detective Garcia reviewed the materials with focused attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and authorization processes. "This is unusually comprehensive," she noted. "Most victims of familial fraud don't have access to such detailed records of where the money went." "My sister provided them," I explained, seeing their surprise. "She's prepared to cooperate fully, regardless of what path I choose." James Chen, who had been silently reviewing the legal documents, looked up. "Ms. Morgan, given the evidence and your sister's cooperation, you have a very strong case should you choose to pursue criminal charges. The systematic nature of the fraud, the forgery of signatures, and the substantial amount involved would likely result in serious consequences for your father." "What kind of consequences specifically?" I asked, needing to understand the full implications. "Given the amount and duration, he would likely face felony charges for fraud, forgery, and possibly wire fraud if electronic transfers were involved. As a financial professional with fiduciary responsibilities, the penalties would be enhanced. We're looking at potential prison time, certain loss of professional licenses, substantial fines, and, of course, mandatory restitution." I absorbed this information, imagining my father, who had spent his life cultivating an image of unimpeachable integrity, facing such public disgrace. Despite everything, the thought brought me no satisfaction. "And if I don't pursue criminal charges?" I asked. Victoria leaned forward. "We can still freeze the remaining assets and pursue civil remedies for recovery, though without criminal proceedings, our leverage is reduced. Your sister's voluntary cooperation could make a significant difference in recovering assets without criminal prosecution." "What if I want accountability without destruction?" I asked, the question that had been forming in my mind throughout the weekend. "I want them to face what they've done. I want restitution. But I'm not convinced that public humiliation and imprisonment serve either justice or healing in this particular case." Detective Garcia studied me thoughtfully. "There may be a middle path. With your sister's cooperation and your father's professional status at stake, we could approach this with a deferred prosecution agreement. Essentially, we prepare the case but hold it in abeyance, provided certain conditions are met: full restitution, professional consequences handled through regulatory bodies rather than criminal court, perhaps mandatory counseling or community service. The threat remains but isn't deployed unless he fails to meet the conditions," I clarified. "Exactly. It provides accountability and ensures restitution without necessarily destroying lives, but it requires that all parties act in good faith." I considered this option, reflecting on what I truly wanted from this situation. Not revenge, certainly. Justice, yes, but justice that created possibility for growth rather than merely inflicting punishment. Accountability that acknowledged the harm done while leaving room for repair, both of financial damage and relational wounds. I'd like to pursue that approach, I decided. And I'd like to be the one to present it to my parents. By late afternoon, the framework was established. Somerset Trust would prepare documentation for a structured restitution plan, Detective Garcia would draft the deferred prosecution agreement, and I would communicate the terms to my family. The meeting concluded with Victoria handing me her business card. "Call me any time," she said, more warmly than her professional demeanor had suggested possible. "Remember, you're in control of this process." That phrase resonated as I left the building. I was in control. Perhaps for the first time regarding anything to do with my family. I sent a text message to both my parents. "We need to meet tonight. Your house, 7 p.m. This isn't negotiable. If you don't agree, I'll proceed with the full fraud investigation without further discussion." My father's response came immediately. "We'll be waiting. Come prepared to be reasonable." Still issuing commands, still defining what reasonable meant. Some patterns run deep. The house looked different as I approached that evening, still imposing in its architectural perfection, but somehow diminished in its psychological power over me. I parked beside my father's Audi, noting that Olivia's Mercedes was absent. She had respected my request to handle this conversation alone, though she had offered to be present if I wanted support. My mother opened the door before I could ring. The bell, her anxious expression poorly masked behind an attempt at normalcy. "Eliza, come in. I've made that lemon tart you always liked." As though dessert could sweeten the bitter conversation ahead. My father waited in the living room rather than his study, a calculated choice to present this as a family discussion rather than a professional reckoning. He stood when I entered, gesturing toward the sofa. "Sit down, Eliza. Let's discuss this situation like adults." I remained standing. "First, I want to be clear about what's already happened. Somerset Trust has completed their investigation. They've documented every unauthorized withdrawal, every forged signature, and every violation of fiduciary duty. The Financial Crimes Unit has reviewed the evidence and believes they have more than enough for criminal prosecution." My father's expression hardened, but I detected the first flicker of genuine concern beneath his controlled exterior. My mother sank into an armchair, her hand at her throat. "Criminal?" she whispered. "Richard, you said this was just a misunderstanding about account management." "It's not criminal unless Eliza makes it so," my father replied dismissively. "This is a family matter that should be handled privately." "It became a legal matter the moment you forged my signature," I countered. "But you're right about one thing. I do have a choice about how to proceed." I opened my bag and removed the folder containing the documentation from my earlier meeting. "These are the terms under which I'm willing to handle this privately. Complete restitution of all misappropriated funds plus interest. Voluntary surrender of your financial licenses to the regulatory authorities with a full disclosure statement. Transfer of the London property back to my name. And family counseling. All of us, including Olivia." My father's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I built everything this family has. I made strategic decisions to invest in the child, who showed actual promise. And now you want to destroy my career because your feelings are hurt?" "Richard," my mother interjected, her voice trembling as she scanned the documents I'd placed on the coffee table. "These withdrawal amounts, where did all this money go?" "To build Olivia's career," I answered when my father remained silent. "To buy her success while ensuring I would never have the resources to compete. To create exactly the outcome that would validate his original judgment, that she was worthy of investment, and I wasn't." My mother's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. "Richard, tell me you didn't." "I did what was necessary for this family," he snapped. "Olivia's success benefits all of us. Her connections, her social position, these things have value beyond mere dollars." "And what about Eliza?" my mother asked, surprising me with a question that suggested she hadn't been fully complicit. "What about her dreams?" "She chose a pedestrian career with limited potential. The money would have been wasted." I had expected his dismissal, had prepared for it, yet the casual cruelty still landed like a physical blow. Not because I still craved his approval, but because it revealed how completely he had failed to see me as a person worthy of basic respect. "The choice before you is simple," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Sign these agreements and comply with all conditions, or face criminal prosecution. Somerset has already frozen the remaining assets. Detective Garcia is prepared to file charges tomorrow if I give the word." My father stood abruptly. "This is blackmail." "No," I corrected him. "This is consequence, something you've managed to avoid your entire life while never hesitating to impose it on others." My mother rose as well, moving to stand not beside my father but between us. "Richard, we need to accept these terms. What you've done, what we've allowed to happen. It can't be defended. His gaze snapped to her, disbelief etched in his features. Patricia, you can't seriously be taking her side. I'm not taking sides, she replied, her voice gaining strength. I'm finally acknowledging reality. We've failed Eliza profoundly. And in doing so, we've failed as parents. She turned to me. I'll sign whatever is necessary. And I hope someday you might consider forgiving me for not protecting you as I should have. The vulnerability in her expression, so unlike her, usual careful composure, momentarily shook my resolve. Not about the terms, which were non-negotiable, but about the emotional wall I'd constructed between us. My father recognized his isolation and shifted tactics immediately. Eliza, surely we can discuss more reasonable terms. The full amount is simply not liquid at present. And my license, that punishes my clients as much as me. The terms aren't negotiable, I said firmly. And they're considerably more merciful than what the law prescribes for what you've done. As for your clients, part of the agreement includes an orderly transition to other advisors of their choosing. I watched as the reality of his situation finally penetrated his defense mechanisms. The careful calculations played out behind his eyes, weighing prison and public disgrace against professional surrender and private accountability. I need time to review these documents with my attorney, he said finally. You have until noon tomorrow, I replied. After that, I called Detective Garcia. My mother walked me to the door while my father remained in the living room, staring at the papers that documented his systematic betrayal. I didn't know the extent, she said quietly as we reached the entryway. I knew he was supporting Olivia more generously, but not that he was using your trust fund, not that he was forging documents. I studied her face, seeing the genuine distress there, yet also recognizing a pattern of willful ignorance that had characterized much of her life. You didn't ask questions because you didn't want answers that would require action, I observed. She flinched at the accuracy of my assessment. Yes, she admitted. I've spent my entire life not asking difficult questions. It seemed easier, but it wasn't. Not really. As I drove away from the house, I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction, just a weighted certainty that I had finally advocated for myself with the same determination I would have shown for anyone else facing such injustice. The path ahead remained complex, the wounds still fresh, but for the first time, I was moving forward on my own terms rather than accepting the limitations others had defined for me. The real victory wasn't in the documents or the restitution, but in recognizing my own worth independent of my family's distorted valuation. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in my circumstances, but in how I understood my place in the world. Where once I had unconsciously accepted their judgment of my potential, I now stood firmly in my own assessment of my worth. That reclamation of self-valuation, I was beginning to understand, was perhaps the most valuable asset I could recover. By the next morning, my father's attorney had contacted Somerset Trust to negotiate the final details of our agreement. I hadn't slept much, my mind replaying the confrontation and anticipating the challenges ahead. I made coffee in my small kitchen, watching the early light filter through my apartment windows, feeling oddly peaceful despite the uncertainty. My phone rang at 11:43 a.m., Victoria Winters from the bank. Ms. Morgan, I wanted to update you personally. Your father has agreed to all terms with only one modification request, a 60-day transition period for his client accounts rather than 30. Given the complexity of some of the portfolios, this seems reasonable from our perspective, but the decision is yours. I considered this request, recognizing it as less about practical necessity and more about my father's need to maintain some illusion of control. Yet the extra time would benefit his clients, who were innocent parties in this situation. I'll agree to the extension, I said, as long as all other conditions remain unchanged. They do, Victoria confirmed. The restitution timeline is established, with the first transfer scheduled for tomorrow. Your father has already submitted his resignation to the relevant regulatory bodies, citing personal reasons, but including the required disclosure statement, and the London property transfer is being processed as we speak. After ending the call, I sat quietly for several moments, processing this resolution. No dramatic courtroom confrontation, no public reckoning, just documents signed, agreements executed, and consequences implemented with business-like efficiency. It felt both anticlimactic and profoundly right. This wasn't about spectacle, but restoration of finances, of truth, of personal autonomy. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Dad just called me. It's done. Can we talk? We arranged to meet at a small park midway between our homes, a neutral space where we had occasionally played as children before competitive activities replaced simple enjoyment in our relationship. I arrived first, claiming a bench overlooking a pond where ducks glided peacefully across the surface. Olivia approached hesitantly, her usual confident stride replaced by something more tentative. She sat beside me, maintaining a careful distance that acknowledged the remaining fragility between us. I've been thinking about what to say to you, she began. Thank you seems inadequate for your choice not to pursue criminal charges. I'm sorry doesn't begin to address the years of inequity. So I'll just say this. I'm committed to making things right? Not just financially, but in how we relate to each other. If that's something you want too. I studied my sister's face, seeing genuine regret there, but also something new, a kind of grounded authenticity I'd rarely witnessed in her. The polished persona she'd cultivated with such care had been partially dismantled, revealing someone more complex and potentially more real. What will you do now? I asked. With your career, I mean. Olivia gazed out at the pond. Start over, essentially. I've withdrawn from the Paris exhibition, returned the advance for the commissioned pieces. I need to know if my work has actual merit without Dad's connections and financial backing. That can't be easy, I observed, genuinely recognizing the courage such a choice required. It's terrifying, she admitted with a small, self-deprecating laugh, but also freeing. For the first time, whatever happens next will be authentically mine, success or failure. We sat in silence for a few moments, watching a mother duck lead her ducklings in orderly procession across the water. What about you? Olivia finally asked. What will you do with the restitution? It was a question I'd been considering. Since the resolution had begun taking shape, the full recovery would eventually restore approximately $2 million to my control, an amount that created possibilities I'd previously considered beyond reach. I'm giving my notice at the publishing house next week, I replied. I'm going to establish that literary agency I've been planning for years. I've already been quietly building a client list of emerging authors I believe in, writers whose voices deserve amplification, but who need someone willing to invest in their development. You're not waiting until you turn 30? Olivia asked, referencing the original terms of our grandfather's trust. I've waited long enough for permission to pursue what matters to me, I said simply. The trust specifies that the funds are for entrepreneurial endeavors. That's exactly what I'll use them for. Something shifted in Olivia's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of the determination that had always existed within me, though rarely acknowledged by our family. I have no doubt you'll succeed, she said. You've always had this persistence that I secretly envied. When things came easily to me because of Dad's intervention, I sometimes wondered if I would have your resilience if facing actual obstacles. I guess you'll find out now, I observed, not unkindly. I guess I will. She hesitated before continuing. Mom called me this morning. She's asked Dad to move out temporarily while they both begin individual therapy. She mentioned wanting to see you when you're ready. This news surprised me. My mother's pattern had always been accommodation, smoothing over conflicts rather than addressing their causes. This initiative suggested a significant departure from her established behavior. "I'll need time," I acknowledged, "but I'm not closing that door." As we prepared to leave the park, Olivia paused. "There's one more thing. I found these when I was going through my files." She handed me a folder containing several magazine articles, each featuring my writing from various literary journals where I'd published occasional pieces over the years. "You kept these?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "I've read everything you've published," she admitted. "Your writing has this clarity that cuts through pretension. It's something I've tried to achieve in my art, not always successfully." This small revelation, that my sister had followed my modest accomplishments while I'd been forced to witness her celebrated successes, created an unexpected bridge between us. Not forgiveness, exactly, but the beginning of a more authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than competitive comparison. The following weeks brought rapid changes. The first restitution payment arrived, allowing me to secure a small office space for my new agency. I worked evenings and weekends, developing my business plan while serving notice at the publishing house. My colleagues there, who had always treated me with more respect than my family had, expressed genuine enthusiasm for my venture, with several offering to refer promising authors my way. I named the agency Perspective Literary, reflecting both my focus on diverse viewpoints and my own journey toward clearer seeing. The logo, a simple key, symbolized unlocking potential, opening doors previously closed. Every aspect of the business embodied values I had clarified through adversity: authenticity over appearance, substance over status, collaborative growth over competitive advantage. 1 month after the confrontation with my parents, I received an unexpected delivery at my new office, still under renovation but beginning to take shape. The package contained a handcrafted wooden desk sign reading, "Eliza Morgan, founder and literary agent," and a note in my mother's handwriting. "From your grandfather's workshop tools. He always said you had his eye for quality and patience for careful work." I should have honored his insight rather than allowing it to be overshadowed. This doesn't ask for forgiveness, just offers recognition of who you've always been. The sign had been made from walnut harvested from our family property, crafted by a local artisan my grandfather had mentored. I placed it on my desk. Not centered and prominent as my father would have displayed such a symbol of achievement, but slightly to one side, a quiet acknowledgement of heritage reclaimed on my own terms. That same week, I finalized my first major contract as an agent, representing a debut novelist whose manuscript had been rejected by 12 publishers before landing on my desk. I recognized in her work the same quality Olivia had noted in my writing: clarity that cut through pretension, authentic voice that didn't require artificial amplification. "Why take a chance on me?" the author asked when I called with news that I'd secured serious interest from 3 publishers following my strategic revisions and targeted submissions. My previous agent said the market wasn't ready for this kind of story. "Because your work deserves investment," I replied, understanding more deeply than she could know the value of someone believing in your potential when others have dismissed it. "And because I'm building an agency that recognizes quality before the market catches up." As spring turned to summer, Perspective Literary signed 4 more promising clients. I hired an assistant, a recent literature graduate with exceptional organizational skills and insight into digital platforms, and established a small scholarship fund for emerging writers from underrepresented backgrounds. Each decision reflected not just business strategy, but personal values clarified through adversity. Riley visited the office one evening, bringing celebratory cupcakes from her cafe and champagne to christen the newly completed space. "It's perfect," she declared, taking in the wall of bookshelves, the comfortable seating area for client meetings, the large windows that filled the space with natural light. "Absolutely you." It's still evolving, I noted. But yes, it feels right. Riley studied me over the rim of her champagne glass. You know what I'm most impressed by? Not just that you stood up to your family and recovered what was rightfully yours, though that was badass, but how you've used this whole experience to clarify what matters to you. You haven't just recovered financially. You've reclaimed your personal narrative. Her observation resonated deeply. The trust fund recovery had created opportunity, certainly, but the true transformation had been internal, recognizing my own value independent of others' assessment, trusting my judgment, and building something aligned with my authentic priorities rather than external expectations. That evening, after Riley left, I remained in my new office, feeling the quiet satisfaction of creation. The space represented more than business success. It embodied reclamation of purpose and possibility. The walls displayed not achievements, but inspiration, quotes from writers I admired, artwork from emerging artists including one promising piece from Olivia's new collection, photographs of places that had shaped my literary sensibilities. On my desk sat a small framed quote from my grandfather that I'd discovered among his papers while helping my mother sort through his workshop. The true measure of wealth is not what you have, but what you build with it. Those words had acquired new meaning throughout this journey. The wealth stolen from me had been more than financial. It included confidence in my judgment, trust in my potential, and belief in my vision. Reclaiming those less tangible assets had proven even more valuable than the monetary restitution. As I looked around the space I had created, physical manifestation of vision reclaimed, I recognized that the greatest reconstruction had not been external, but internal. I had rebuilt not just financial security, but self-trust. I had recovered not just stolen funds, but faith in my own perceptions. I had restored not just material resources, but the ability to define success on my own terms. That evening, I sent a brief email to my 3 newest clients, confirming our strategy meeting the following morning. Then I locked my office door, taking a moment to trace the nameplate my mother had sent. Tangible recognition of who I had always been, even when others refused to see it. Outside, twilight settled over the city as I walked home, no longer deferring. Dreams until someone else deemed me worthy of pursuing them. The trust fund had been recovered, but the true restoration had been of something far more valuable: the authority to write my own story, without apology or permission. The 6-month mark since discovering the trust fund deception arrived with little fanfare but significant change. Perspective Literary had grown from aspirational concept to functioning reality, with a client roster of 9 promising authors and 2 books scheduled for publication in the coming year. The office had expanded to include a small conference room where I hosted monthly workshops for emerging writers, creating the supportive community I had lacked during my own early career. My morning routine had transformed as well. Instead of beginning each day with anxiety about meeting others' expectations, I awoke with purpose, reviewing submission strategies, planning client meetings, and allocating time for the manuscript. Evaluation I still conducted personally for each potential client. The work energized rather than depleted me, confirmation that I had found not just a viable business but a genuine calling. On this particular morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual to prepare for an important meeting. Addison Knight, a respected senior editor from Meridian Publishing, one of the most prestigious houses in the industry, had requested a breakfast discussion about my growing roster of diverse authors. Such interest from a major publisher represented significant validation of my approach. As I arranged pastries from Riley's cafe and prepared coffee, I caught my reflection in the window. Confident posture, purposeful movements, clear eyes. The contrast with my former self, the woman who had habitually hunched slightly as though to avoid notice, who had qualified her opinions with unnecessary apologies, was striking. Addison arrived precisely on time, her reputation for directness immediately apparent as she declined small talk in favor of specifics. "I'll be frank, Eliza," she said after preliminary introductions. 3 of our editors have independently brought your clients' manuscripts to acquisition meetings in recent months. That pattern caught my attention. You're clearly identifying and developing talent that others are missing. I acknowledged the observation with a simple thank you, resisting my former habit of deflecting recognition. What interests me, Addison continued, is your methodology. How are you finding these voices when our established channels are missing them? It was a question that went to the heart of what differentiated my approach, a philosophy shaped directly by my personal experience. I look for authenticity rather than marketability, I explained. Not because I'm ignoring commercial potential, but because I believe true originality creates its own market. Many promising writers are rejected because their work doesn't fit established categories or follow current trends. I'm specifically seeking those outliers. Addison's expression reflected professional interest rather than the skepticism such a statement might once have provoked. That's admirable in theory, but risky in practice. Publishing is notoriously risk-averse, which creates opportunity for those willing to embrace calculated risk, I countered. My business model incorporates longer development timelines and more intensive editorial collaboration. I'm investing in writers' long-term careers rather than quick transactions. That approach requires significant capital, Addison observed, her gaze assessing. Most new agencies operate on tighter margins. I maintained steady eye contact, neither hiding nor emphasizing the circumstances that had enabled my unconventional model. I have resources that allow me to prioritize quality over immediate return. That creates space for discovering exceptional work that requires development rather than just marketable work that's ready for submission. What remained unspoken, the source of those resources, the betrayal that had preceded their recovery, felt increasingly less relevant to my professional identity. The funds had been wrongfully diverted and rightfully restored, but how I chose to use them defined my path forward far more than their complicated history. Our discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, evolving from initial evaluation to strategic planning. By the time Addison departed, we had established framework for a potential partnership. Meridian would create a dedicated imprint for diverse voices with Perspective Literary, serving as primary talent pipeline. The arrangement would preserve my agency's independence while creating expanded opportunities for my clients. As I cleared the breakfast dishes, my assistant Julia arrived with a stack of manuscripts for review. "The Meridian meeting went well?" she asked, noting my expression. "Very well," I confirmed. "We may need to accelerate our growth timeline." Julia hesitated before placing a cream-colored envelope on my desk. "This arrived by courier while you were in your meeting. Marked, personal." I recognized my mother's stationery immediately, heavy stock with the family monogram embossed in the corner. Since sending the desk nameplate 3 months earlier, she had maintained respectful distance, communicating primarily through Olivia about financial matters related to the restitution agreement. Inside the envelope was a formal invitation to a gathering at my parents' home the following weekend, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Eliza, this marks your father's final client transition and formal retirement from financial management. His regulatory disclosure and surrender of licenses became official yesterday. We're hosting a small gathering, family only, to acknowledge this transition. Your presence is requested but not presumed. With respect for your boundaries, Patricia." The careful wording reflected our still fragile relationship, neither assuming intimacy nor ignoring the breach that remained under repair. The invitation itself represented significant change. My mother was acknowledging reality rather than maintaining appearances, recognizing that my father's career had ended not through glorious retirement, but necessary consequence. After careful consideration, I texted Olivia. "Got Mom's invitation. What's your perspective on the gathering?" Her response came quickly, surprisingly genuine. "Dad's been in twice-weekly therapy, not magically transformed, but actually working on himself. I'm going, but completely understand if you pass. I placed the invitation in my desk drawer, deciding to give myself time before responding. The day's work provided welcome distraction: manuscript reviews, submission strategy calls with 2 clients, and a lengthy discussion with my attorney about expanding Perspective Literary's legal structure to accommodate growth. By late afternoon, I had reached a decision about the family gathering, one based not on obligation, but authentic assessment of my own readiness. I composed a brief response to my mother. I'll attend, not for celebration, but for acknowledgement of transition. Please understand this represents willingness to witness change, not proclamation of reconciliation. Timelines for healing cannot be scheduled like business matters. That evening, I met Riley for dinner at her newly expanded cafe, now featuring evening service with a thoughtfully curated wine selection. As we shared a meal at a corner table, I updated her on both the Meridian opportunity and the family invitation. Interesting timing, she observed. Professional validation and family reconciliation converging. Not reconciliation, I corrected. Just willingness to witness transition. Riley smiled knowingly. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have considered being in the same room with them. That's evolution, whether you label it that way or not. Her observation was accurate, though uncomfortable to acknowledge. My willingness to attend the family gathering reflected internal shift as much as external circumstances. Increased security in my own identity, reduced vulnerability to their judgment, and growing capacity to engage from strength rather than defensive positioning. The weekend arrived with unusual clarity for late summer. Brilliant sunshine, low humidity, gentle breeze that carried the first hints of approaching autumn. I selected my attire for the family gathering with deliberate intention, not the careful conformity that had once characterized my choices in their presence, but neither the reflexive rejection that would center our history rather than my authentic present. I chose a simple dress in deep blue, professional without being formal, paired with the vintage silver earrings my grandfather had given me for my college graduation. Arriving at my parents' home, I noted subtle changes to the property. The obsessively manicured landscaping had been replaced by more natural plantings. The imposing front door, previously stained dark to emphasize its solidity, had been painted a welcoming sage green. Small shifts that suggested evolving priorities. My mother greeted me with visible restraint, clearly wanting to embrace but respecting the boundaries I had established. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. "Your father is on the back terrace with Olivia." The gathering was indeed small, just my parents, Olivia, and her new partner Claire, a museum curator she had met through her restructured career path. No business associates, no family friends to maintain appearances for, a private acknowledgement rather than public performance. My father rose when I approached the terrace, his physical appearance markedly changed from our confrontation 6 months earlier. He had lost weight, his previously immaculate appearance now more relaxed if not quite casual. Most notably, the careful mask of authority had softened, revealing more of the human complexity beneath. "Eliza," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Thank you for joining us." I acknowledged him with a nod, accepting the sparkling water my mother offered, rather than the champagne being served to celebrate the retirement. This wasn't a celebration from my perspective, but an observation of necessary change. Dinner proceeded with surprising civility, conversation focusing primarily on neutral topics. Olivia's new teaching position at the Community Arts Center, Claire's upcoming exhibition of emerging artists, my mother's volunteer work with literacy programs. My father spoke little, a significant departure from his former dominance of family interactions. As dessert was served, he finally addressed me directly. "I understand your agency is gaining recognition." Olivia mentioned a potential partnership with Meridian. In previous years, such acknowledgement would have been immediately qualified, with criticism or helpful advice. Now he simply waited for my response, his expression reflecting what appeared to be genuine interest rather than evaluation. "Yes," I confirmed. "We're establishing a specialized imprint for voices traditionally underrepresented in commercial publishing." "That's significant," he said after a moment, taking a different approach to the market. "Identifying value others have overlooked," I replied, the parallel to his own profession, and to his failure to recognize my worth, intentionally implied but not directly stated. He nodded, registering the subtext. A skill I clearly lacked in more important matters. This acknowledgement, however limited, represented evolution I had not anticipated. Not dramatic transformation, not complete understanding, but movement, from absolute certainty toward recognition of error. After dinner, my mother suggested coffee on the terrace, an invitation I accepted while maintaining emotional distance. As conversation continued among the others, my father approached where I stood at the garden's edge. "I have something for you," he said, extending a legal envelope. The final restitution transfer was processed yesterday, completing the financial terms of our agreement. This represents the formal surrender of my licenses and documentation of all client transitions. I accepted the envelope without examining its contents. "Thank you for honoring the agreement." He hesitated before continuing. "What I did was unconscionable. The therapy I've undertaken as part of our agreement has forced me to confront patterns I've spent a lifetime justifying. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I recognize the harm I caused." His statement wasn't elaborately emotional. He remained a man of restraint. But it contained an authenticity I had rarely witnessed from him. Not performative remorse, but genuine acknowledgement. "Recognition matters," I said simply. "Action matters more." "Yes," he agreed. Hence the completed restitution and professional consequences, but also the personal work, which continues regardless of formal agreements. As the evening concluded, I maintained the boundaries necessary for my continued healing while acknowledging the efforts being made, however belated, toward accountability. This balance represented personal growth beyond binary reactions of complete trust or absolute rejection, toward nuanced engagement based on ongoing assessment. Driving home, I reflected on the previous 6 months' evolution. The initial discovery of betrayal had created opportunity not just for financial restoration, but for fundamental recalibration of relationships, priorities, and self-understanding. What had begun as recovery of stolen resources had expanded into reclamation of personal authority, transformation of professional identity, and renovation of family dynamics. Most significantly, I had developed capacity to define success according to internal values rather than external validation. My agency's approach, investing in overlooked potential, recognizing worth others dismissed, providing resources for authentic development, represented direct application of lessons from personal experience to professional purpose. The trust fund itself, now fully restored, had become less central to my identity than what the struggle for its recovery had revealed. My resilience, discernment, and capacity to transform injustice into purposeful direction. The money provided practical foundation, certainly, but the true wealth lay in the wisdom gained through its recovery. As I arrived home, a manuscript waited for review. A promising debut novel from a writer who had faced repeated rejection before, finding her voice. Tomorrow, I would provide feedback designed to strengthen her work while preserving its essential uniqueness. This tangible application of my evolving philosophy felt like the most meaningful response to my own experience, translating personal insight into practical support for others navigating their own creative journeys. The circle from betrayal to restoration had not completed, but transformed into spiral of ongoing growth. Each challenge revealing new capacity, each resolution creating foundation for further development. This continuing evolution, rather than any specific achievement or reconciliation, represented the most significant outcome of what had begun as financial deception, but expanded into profound recalibration of value, purpose, and possibility. 1 year after discovering the trust fund deception, I stood at the entrance of Perspective Literary's new offices on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street. The expanded space occupied the entire 2nd floor of a renovated historic building, with tall windows that flooded the rooms with natural light and original hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. Where once I had operated from a single room with just enough space for my desk and a small meeting area, the agency now employed a staff of 5 and represented 17 authors across multiple genres. The morning sun cast geometric patterns through the divided light windows as I unlocked the door, arriving early to review final preparations for the day's centerpiece event. In the main conference room, chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, facing a small podium, with promotional displays featuring the cover art of Intersections, the debut novel from Perspective's first major success story, Nadia Cheng, whose manuscript had been rejected by 13 publishers before landing. On my desk 18 months earlier, today marked the official launch of Meridian's new imprint, Prism Press, dedicated to diverse voices and innovative narratives. The partnership we had begun discussing a year earlier had evolved into a groundbreaking industry model, with Perspective Literary providing exclusive first-look rights to Meridian in exchange for unprecedented creative control and royalty structures favoring authors. Nadia's novel would be Prism's inaugural release, with a marketing campaign that positioned her work not as niche, but as leading the vanguard of contemporary American fiction. As I adjusted the display for maximum impact, my phone chimed with a message from Julia, now promoted to associate agent focusing on young adult and middle-grade fiction. Car service just picked up Nadia. She's nervous but ready. See you at the office in 30. The transformation of Perspective Literary had been methodical rather than explosive. Steady growth built on a foundation of quality rather than quantity. We had declined offers from larger agencies seeking acquisition, choosing instead to maintain independence while developing strategic partnerships. The agency's reputation had grown not through splashy publicity, but consistent results. 6-figure advances for previously overlooked authors, critically acclaimed debuts, and innovative digital initiatives that expanded audience engagement. The expanded team reflected this philosophy as well. Each member selected not just for professional qualifications, but alignment with core values. Darren, our contract specialist, had previously worked at a major publisher where he had advocated unsuccessfully for more equitable author agreements. Maya, our newest literary agent focusing on narrative nonfiction, had left an established agency frustrated by their reluctance to represent voices outside mainstream perspectives. Julia had proven her exceptional editorial instincts while maintaining the organizational systems that kept the agency functioning seamlessly. As team members began arriving, the office came alive with purposeful energy. The atmosphere reflected our carefully cultivated culture, collaborative rather than competitive, rigorous without being rigid, ambitious without sacrificing integrity. The publisher's weekly feature just went live, Maya announced, pulling up the article on her tablet. They're calling Prism the most significant development in mainstream publishing's diversity efforts to date, and specifically noting our role as architects of a new model that may reshape industry standards. The validation felt meaningful, not because it came from an industry authority, but because it recognized the structural innovation we had prioritized over cosmetic changes. Many publishers had launched diversity initiatives focused on content, acquisition without addressing fundamental inequities in contract terms, marketing resources, or career development. Our partnership with Meridian had insisted on comprehensive reform, from submission evaluation through contract structure to marketing investment. By mid-morning, the office filled with guests for the launch event. Addison Knight from Meridian arrived with her team, followed by literary critics, booksellers, and fellow agents. Some genuinely supportive, others curious about the attention our relatively young agency had attracted. Riley came bearing a spectacular cake decorated to match Nadia's book cover, her cafe now supplying refreshments for all our events through a mutually beneficial arrangement that supported both our growing businesses. When Nadia arrived, I met her at the elevator, still a somewhat shy woman in her early 30s whose quiet demeanor belied the fierce brilliance of her writing. Her novel explored intergenerational trauma and healing through the experiences of 3 women in a Chinese-American family, written with unflinching honesty and startling beauty. "I still can't believe this is happening," she confessed as we walked toward the increasingly crowded conference room. 2 years ago, I was ready to give up writing entirely after all those rejections. "I'm glad you didn't," I said simply. "Literature would be significantly poorer without your voice." "It wouldn't exist without your belief in it," she countered. "You were the only agent who saw potential instead of problems in my manuscript." This pattern had repeated throughout Perspective's development, authors expressing gratitude for recognition that should have been forthcoming from the beginning. My own experience of having potential dismissed had created particular sensitivity to unacknowledged value, an almost instinctual ability to recognize authentic quality beneath rough execution. The launch proceeded with carefully orchestrated simplicity, brief remarks from Addison about Prism's mission, my overview of the development process, and Nadia's reading from her novel. The audience response confirmed what early reviews had suggested. This was not merely a promising debut, but a significant literary achievement. As the event transitioned to informal networking, I noticed an unexpected presence near the refreshment table, my mother, standing somewhat uncertainly at the periphery of the gathering. Our relationship had evolved into careful cordiality over the past year, with occasional family dinners and brief coffee meetings, but she had never visited the agency before. "I hope it's all right that I came," she said as I approached. "Olivia mentioned the launch in our weekly call. I've been following your success in Publishers Weekly." "It's fine," I assured her, genuinely surprised but not displeased by her initiative. "I didn't realize you read industry publications." "I've been educating myself about publishing," she admitted, "trying to understand your world better." She gestured toward the crowded room. "This is quite remarkable, Eliza. You've built something significant in a very short time." Coming from a woman who had spent decades defining accomplishment exclusively through her husband's metrics, this recognition represented genuine evolution. She was seeing me, perhaps for the first time, through her own assessment rather than filtered through my father's judgments. "Thank you for coming," I said, offering the simple acknowledgement her effort deserved. We spoke briefly about Nadia's novel, which my mother had pre-ordered and already begun reading. Her observations were thoughtful rather than performative, suggesting genuine engagement with the text. As she prepared to leave, she handed me a small wrapped package. "This arrived at the house yesterday," she explained. "From your grandfather's attorney. Apparently, it was held in trust until specific conditions were met." I unwrapped the package later that evening in the privacy of my apartment, after the successful launch had concluded and the various celebrations had finished. Inside, I found a leather-bound journal with my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. On the first page, "For Eliza, to be delivered when she establishes her own business. I've observed in you the same qualities that served me well: discernment rather than flash, substance over appearance, and patient attention to what others overlook. May this journal provide perspective as you build your own legacy." The remaining pages contained his business observations spanning decades, insights on recognizing genuine quality, notes on maintaining integrity in competitive environments, reflections on building teams based on complementary strengths rather than hierarchy. The final entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, "I've arranged your trust fund to provide financial foundation, but the true inheritance lies in qualities money cannot purchase: discernment, resilience, and the courage to define success by your own measures rather than others' expectations. Trust your judgment, especially when it diverges from conventional wisdom. The greatest opportunities often exist precisely where others see only limitations. His words, written years before the trust fund deception, before my struggle to reclaim what was rightfully mine, before the establishment of an agency founded on precisely those principles, created a sense of continuity I had not previously recognized. The financial resources had been temporarily diverted but ultimately restored. The more valuable inheritance, his perspective on identifying overlooked value, had remained accessible through my own intuitive approach. This connection to my grandfather's philosophy provided framework for understanding my agency's rapid success. What might externally appear as remarkable business acumen was actually the natural application of principles I had absorbed through observation and later strengthened through adversity, seeing worth where others perceived only problems, investing in potential rather than seeking immediate return, and building collaborative relationships rather than competitive hierarchies. The following morning, I shared selections from the journal with my team during our weekly strategy meeting, not as prescriptive direction, but as historical context for the values we had independently established. The continuity between my grandfather's approach to identifying quality decades earlier and our current methodology validated our direction while providing additional perspectives on implementation. It's like having a conversation with someone who sees the same opportunities we do but from a different historical vantage point, Maya observed. The fundamentals haven't changed, even though the specific applications have evolved dramatically. This integration of past wisdom with present innovation became increasingly central to Perspective's approach. Respecting traditional literary quality while embracing evolving forms, honoring established publishing protocols while challenging inequitable practices, maintaining professional standards while creating space for authentic expression. As summer transitioned to fall, Perspective Literary continued expanding both its client roster and industry influence. Nadia's novel reached the New York Times bestseller list in its third week of release, confirming our conviction that authentic voices could achieve commercial success without compromise. 3 additional Perspective clients signed with Prism Press, while others found homes with publishers seeking to emulate our partnership model. The agency's financial success enabled expansion of our pro bono initiatives, a workshop series for writers from underrepresented communities, a scholarship program for emerging literary critics, and a mentorship project pairing established authors with promising new voices. These programs reflected our core philosophy that literary culture thrives through diversification of perspective rather than concentration of opportunity. On a personal level, my relationship with wealth had transformed from focus on recovery to emphasis on responsible stewardship. While the trust fund had provided essential foundation for establishing the agency, Perspective's ongoing success now generated substantial income independent of those resources. This allowed me to reconsider the trust's purpose, shifting from personal security to strategic investment in literary infrastructure. In consultation with financial and legal advisors, I established the Perspective Foundation with half of the recovered trust fund, creating a permanent endowment supporting emerging writers and independent publishing initiatives. The foundation's governing principles explicitly acknowledged lessons from my personal experience, emphasizing transparent governance, equitable distribution, and recognition of unconventional potential. Perhaps most significantly, my relationship with my family continued evolving, not toward idealized reconciliation, but toward authentic engagement that acknowledged both lingering impacts and genuine change. My father, now fully retired and continuing his therapeutic work, had gradually shifted from defensive justification toward genuine inquiry about my professional expertise. My mother had developed increasing independence, pursuing her own interests in literacy advocacy and arts education. Olivia and I had established a relationship based on mutual respect rather than comparative judgment, occasionally collaborating on projects that bridged literary and visual arts. These relational shifts reflected broader transformation in my Understanding of legacy, from passive inheritance to active creation, from financial resources to value systems, from individual achievement to community impact. The trust fund had provided practical foundation, certainly, but its recovery had catalyzed much more meaningful development: clarification of personal values, establishment of professional purpose, and creation of systems that extended opportunity beyond myself. As autumn leaves began turning along Maple Street outside Perspective's windows, I reviewed submissions for our spring list. Manuscripts that might once have been rejected for their unconventional structures or challenging themes, but now received thoughtful consideration from a team trained to recognize distinctive quality beneath superficial marketability. The agency I had built did not merely represent authors, it embodied philosophy. That authentic value often exists precisely where conventional assessment has failed to recognize it. That investment in overlooked potential yields exceptional returns, and that true wealth lies not in accumulation but in creation of opportunity for others. This perspective, hard-won through betrayal, recovery, and rebuilding, had transformed personal injury into professional purpose, financial deception into philosophical clarity, and individual inheritance into collective possibility. The true legacy was not what had been restored to me, but what I was now empowered to build for others. 18 months after establishing Perspective Literary, I faced the first major crisis of my professional career. The news arrived on a crisp October morning via an urgent call from Addison at Meridian Publishing. "Eliza, we have a situation," she said, her typically composed voice tense. "Beacon House announced this morning they're launching a direct competitor to Prism Press. They've poached 3 senior editors from our team and apparently secured significant financial backing. They're calling it Spectrum Books and using almost identical marketing language about diversity and representation." I processed this information while gazing out at the autumn foliage visible from my office window. Beacon House was the 3rd largest publishing conglomerate in the country, known for aggressive business tactics and prioritizing commercial potential over literary merit. Their sudden interest in diverse voices represented not philosophical alignment, but recognition of the market, success we had demonstrated. "How concerning is this from Meridian's perspective?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the immediate implications for our partnership. "The board is rattled," Addison admitted. "Beacon is offering substantial advances to build their WOW list quickly. They've already approached 2 of your authors whose contracts are coming up for renewal." This last piece of information triggered genuine alarm. While business competition was expected, direct targeting of our authors threatened both Perspective's stability and the careers of writers who had trusted our guidance. "Which authors?" I asked, already opening our contract database. "Nadia Cheng and Marcus Reynolds, our 2 most commercially successful clients." The strategy was transparent. Establish credibility by acquiring established diverse authors, then leverage that foundation to attract emerging voices. From a purely business perspective, it was logical. From an ethical standpoint, it represented everything we had established: perspective to counteract, treating authors as commodities rather than creators, prioritizing acquisition over development, and positioning diversity as marketing advantage rather than intrinsic value. "I'll speak with them immediately," I assured Addison. "But we need a comprehensive strategy, not just defensive measures." After ending the call, I gathered my senior team for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense as I outlined Beacon's initiative and its potential implications for our agency and authors. "This isn't just about competition," Maya observed, her expression troubled. "It's about co-opting the entire model we've built. The language, the positioning, even the visual branding from what I've seen of their announcement materials. They're essentially creating a corporate version of Prism without the substantive commitments to equity and author development." Darren, our contracts specialist, provided practical perspective. "Their standard contracts are notoriously author-unfriendly: limited creative control, aggressive rights grabs, minimal marketing guarantees unless you're already established." If they maintain those practices while using our language about representation and opportunity, they'll damage everything we've worked to build. The threat extended beyond immediate business concerns. Beacon's approach could undermine the credibility of legitimate diversity initiatives throughout publishing, reinforcing cynical perceptions that inclusion was merely a marketing trend rather than structural commitment. Their substantial resources could create superficial success while implementing none of the substantive reforms that made PRISM genuinely revolutionary. "We need to contact our authors immediately," Julia suggested. "Transparency has always been our approach. They should hear about this threat directly from us, along with our strategy for responding." I nodded in agreement while considering the broader implications. This challenge represented the inevitable pushback against any meaningful change. Established systems replicating the appearance of innovation while maintaining underlying power structures. We had anticipated competition eventually, but not such a direct appropriation of our model. The immediate concerns required triage. I scheduled individual calls with all our authors, prioritizing Nadia and Marcus, who had already been approached by Beacon. The conversations would need to acknowledge the situation directly while providing clear contrast between superficial representation and substantive advocacy. Before making these calls, I took a moment for private reflection, pulling out my grandfather's journal for perspective on navigating industry challenges. His entry from 1978 seemed particularly relevant. "When larger competitors adopt your innovations, remember that imitation confirms your vision while revealing their limitations. They can replicate methods, but rarely the underlying philosophy that makes those methods effective. Maintain focus on what cannot be easily copied, relationships built on mutual respect, decisions guided by consistent values, and commitment to excellence that transcends quarterly results." This wisdom provided framework for my approach. We couldn't prevent Beacon from establishing Spectrum books or using similar language about diversity. We couldn't match their financial resources or marketing budgets. But we could demonstrate the substantive differences between superficial representation and meaningful advocacy through our actions rather than our assertions. My call with Nadia was scheduled first, appropriate given her position as our leading author and PRISM's inaugural success. Her debut novel had exceeded all sales projections while receiving critical acclaim, establishing her as a significant literary voice and making her an obvious target for competitors. "I already told them no," she said before I could fully explain the situation. Their offer was substantial, double my advance for the second book, but the contract terms were concerning, particularly regarding creative control and subsidiary rights. Her immediate rejection of Beacon's approach reflected the relationship we had built, based on transparency, shared values, and mutual respect rather than merely transactional advantage. "What they don't understand," Nadia continued, "is that Perspective and PRISM offered something more valuable than simply a publishing contract. You provided development when my work needed strengthening, advocacy when it faced resistance, and community where I had previously experienced isolation. That foundation can't be purchased with a larger advance." Marcus expressed similar sentiments during our conversation, though with more explicit analysis of industry dynamics. As a former publishing insider himself before focusing on writing, full-time he recognized Beacon's strategy for what it was: market-driven appropriation rather than values-based commitment. "They're trying to buy credibility," he observed, "but authors talk to each other. We know the difference between publishers who see diversity as a trend to capitalize on versus those implementing substantive changes in how they develop, position, and support writers from underrepresented communities." These conversations reinforced my growing conviction that our response needed to be substantive rather than reactive, demonstrating through action rather than assertion what made our approach distinctive. We couldn't prevent Beacon from establishing a competing imprint or making attractive financial offers. We could, however, deepen our commitment to the underlying values that had established our reputation. The next morning, I presented a comprehensive strategy to both my team and Addison from Meridian. Rather than focusing exclusively on defending against Beacon's initiative, the plan centered on strengthening our distinctive approach through several key initiatives. First, we would accelerate the mentorship program we had been developing, pairing established prospective authors with emerging voices from underrepresented communities. This program would provide substantive development rather than merely acquisition, creating pathways for writers who needed support before being commercially viable. Second, we would establish a quarterly industry symposium addressing structural barriers in publishing, bringing together authors, agents, editors, and marketing professionals to develop practical solutions rather than theoretical discussions. This positioned perspective as thought leaders while creating accountability mechanisms for the industry as a whole. Third, we would implement enhanced contract transparency, publishing annotated versions of our standard agreements that explained each provision in plain language and explicitly identified how our terms differed from industry norms. This would create pressure for improved practices while educating authors about their rights. Finally, we would launch a digital platform providing resources for aspiring writers navigating the publishing landscape, with particular emphasis on communities historically excluded from traditional pathways. This initiative extended our impact beyond our direct client relationships while demonstrating authentic commitment to systemic change. This isn't just about competitive differentiation, I explained. It's about accelerating the substantive reforms we've already initiated. Beacon can replicate our language and even our business model, but they cannot easily reproduce our fundamental approach to author development and advocacy. Addison's response confirmed Meridian's alignment. With this philosophy, the board has authorized additional investment in Prism Press, including expanded marketing budgets for debut authors and accelerated development of the educational initiatives you've outlined. They recognize that our partnership's strength lies in substantive commitment rather than market positioning. As we implemented this strategy over subsequent weeks, the contrast between approaches became increasingly evident to the publishing community. Beacon launched Spectrum books with substantial publicity and aggressive acquisition tactics, offering significant advances to established authors while maintaining their traditional contract structures and development practices. Perspective responded not with matching offers or public criticism, but with systematic implementation of our enhanced initiatives. The mentorship program launched with 12 established authors working with emerging voices. The industry symposium's initial session drew participation from across publishing, establishing practical working groups focused on specific structural barriers. The Contract Transparency Initiative received attention from legal advocates and industry organizations. Most significantly, our author community remained intact, with Nadia and Marcus publicly declining Beacon's offers while expressing support for Perspective's approach. Their loyalty stemmed not from financial advantage, but from alignment with the underlying values that had guided our representation from the beginning. This challenge had forced crystallization of Perspective's core philosophy, that meaningful change required more than superficial diversity in content acquisition. True transformation demanded substantive reform in how literary voices were developed, positioned, and supported throughout their careers. The crisis had accelerated implementation of initiatives we had envisioned for the future, transforming theoretical commitments into concrete programs with immediate impact. Throughout this process, I found myself returning to lessons from my personal experience, how superficial recognition without substantive support had characterized my family's approach, how systemic advantages had been directed toward Olivia while I was expected to succeed without comparable resources, how recovery had required not just financial restitution, but fundamental recalibration of relationships and responsibilities. These insights informed my leadership during the crisis, creating capacity to distinguish between reaction and response, between defensive positioning and affirmative action, between protecting current advantages and building sustainable systems. The challenge from Beacon had initially appeared as potential threat to everything we had built. It had transformed into catalyst for implementing our most ambitious visions more rapidly than originally planned. By year's end, industry observers had begun noting the substantive differences between Spectrum's market-driven approach and Prism's development-focused model. While Beacon had secured several high-profile acquisitions through substantial advances, Perspective continued discovering and developing distinctive voices that might have been overlooked by traditional evaluation metrics. The contrast in philosophy had become evident through action rather than assertion. This resolution reflected broader wisdom I had gained through personal adversity, that challenges often reveal authentic values more clearly than success, that pressure accelerates evolution of systems already in development, and that responding to opposition with defensive measures rarely proves as effective as recommitting to foundational principles with renewed vigor. The trust fund recovery had taught me that reclamation of what rightfully belonged to me was merely the beginning, rather than the conclusion of transformation. Similarly, this professional challenge had revealed that establishing Perspective's initial success represented only the foundation for more substantive impact yet to come. As winter settled over the city, I reviewed our strategic planning documents with this expanded perspective. What had begun as response to immediate threat had evolved into comprehensive vision for Perspective's future development, extending beyond traditional literary representation to become catalyst for structural change throughout publishing. This evolution mirrored my personal journey from focusing primarily on recovery of what had been taken to creating something more valuable than what had been lost. The challenge had revealed capacities within our organization and clarity in our purpose that might have remained dormant without the catalyst of opposition. My grandfather's journal entry from his own period of significant industry disruption seemed particularly relevant. The measure of leadership is not found in periods of easy success, but in moments that demand clear articulation of values through decisive action. Crisis reveals whether stated principles are merely convenient positioning or genuine foundations for decision-making. The challenge from Beacon had provided exactly such revelation, confirming that Perspective's commitment to recognizing overlooked potential and developing distinctive voices represented genuine foundation rather than convenient positioning. Our response had demonstrated the substantive difference between appropriating language about diversity and implementing structures that created actual opportunity. This clarity of purpose would guide Perspective's continued evolution, transforming what had begun as personal reclamation into community-wide transformation, not merely recovering what had been lost, but creating possibilities that had never before existed. Retry up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.